Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Hey, anybody in here ever had a bad day? Am I in the right room? Okay. I'm talking about like a really bad day. Like maybe you've had a bad decade. Maybe the 90s weren't too hot and they've just kind of trickled over into the 2000s and now just kind of following you still. I don't know if you've ever kind of found yourself in the place of prayer being like, all right, is any of this ever going to make sense? Like, is God ever going to connect the dots? You ever feel yourself asking that? Like, how is all this finally ever going to come together? Is this as good as it gets? Maybe you feel like you're hitting a glass ceiling. Be like, hey, is this like the pinnacle of life? Because if it is, I'm not sure. I want to keep doing this. Maybe you kind of find yourself hitting the snooze button over and over and over again in the morning, and you're like, remind me again why I still wake up like every single morning and do this thing besides just to pay the bills. Well, with that in mind, what I want us to do, I want us to learn from our friend Joseph today. And Joseph, not father of Jesus, Joseph, but Old Testament Joseph, because I think as we kind of dive into Joseph's story for a few minutes this morning, I believe that God is going to show us our life through his life and kind of take us to a good place today. And so if we rewind all the way back to Genesis, we find Abraham, right? Abraham, father of faith. And Abraham had a son named Isaac, and Isaac had a son named Jacob. And Jacob actually had 12 sons, and his 11th son was Joseph. And so we have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And Joseph was Jacob's favorite son. I know we're not supposed to say that, but he was. And in fact, he loved Joseph so much that he actually made Joseph a robe. Some would even call it an amazing Technicolor dream coat. And it made his brothers furious. His brothers hated him. One of the reasons was he was dad's favorite son. So you know what that means? He can get away with anything. Anybody have one of those in the family? Where you're like, if I did what you did, mom and dad would bury me in the backyard. Like, this is Joseph, okay? And to make matters worse, literally the first time we see Joseph, he's been shepherding out with his brothers, and he runs back in because apparently they aren't doing it right, and he tattletales on them to their dad. And then Joseph opens up his mouth, and Joseph wasn't always the best with a mind filter, like, hey, just because you think it doesn't mean you should say it. And Joseph opens up his mouth, and he says, hey, everybody, listen, I had a dream. And in fact, in my dream, we were all out harvesting wheat, and in the middle of it, my bundle of wheat stood up tall, and all of your bundles came around and bowed down to mine. And all of his 10 older brothers stopped, looked up at him, and said, are you serious right now? Do you intend to reign over us? Is this how this is going to happen? And they had had enough. And so literally, they actually decide to kill him. They decide to kill their little brother. But then in this last minute surge of compassion, they decide just to sell him into slavery. And so what they do, they see Joseph coming, they beat Joseph up, they rip his jacket off, they throw him into a pit, and then they sell him into slavery. And if you can imagine the despair of the moment, right? I mean, imagine that you wake up one morning one way and you go to bed that night completely different. And here we find 17-year-old Joseph shackled ankle to ankle with other slaves, being shipped off to who knows where, to be sold to who knows who, to do who knows what. I mean, what do you do with that? And then the slave traders, they actually take him to Egypt. And in Egypt, they sell him to a man named Potiphar. And Potiphar was a really high up guy. He was actually the captain of Pharaoh's guard. Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the whole world. And Potiphar was right there with him. He was like the captain of his guard. And so we find Joseph in Potiphar's house. And then we catch up with this really strange verse. Genesis 39:2 says this, the Lord was with Joseph. No, he wasn't. That's not how this works, right? Come on. Hey, we're real people. If the Lord was really with Joseph, his brothers would be the ones in slavery, and he would be back sipping on like some sweet tea with his parents back on the homestead, right? Because we all know that nothing bad ever happens to those who love God. Genesis 39:2, the full verse actually reads like this. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. Now, if you'll just go with me, God has a really good sense of humor, and we don't always appreciate it, and we're going to discover it a little bit more here over the next few minutes, but this is actually really funny to me. I know it was horrible to Joseph, but it's funny to me looking at Joseph's story. Can you imagine that your prayer that evening, God, thank you for prospering me in slavery in the house of my Egyptian master. That's your praise report. That's what that you're filling out your connection card. That's what God's done in my life. I'm a slave, but it's not that bad. Verse 3, when his master saw that the Lord was with him, when Potiphar saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. And from the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. If I'm Joseph, I'm saying, time out, God. You're with me, and you're blessing him because of me? How about you bless me because of me and get me out of this, right? Come on, stop being so religious, being like, well, of course that's how it happens. No, come on. You're innocent, and you're blessing him because of me? This isn't right. Joseph's prayers have to be, God, this isn't right. And if you know the story just goes from bad to worse, right? From the other room, you hear, yoo-hoo, Joseph. Potiphar's wife is macking on Joseph. And Joseph is put instantly in a no-win situation, right? What are you supposed to do, Joseph? Because you have two options, Joseph. You can either disobey God, and you can sleep with Potiphar's wife, and her husband will have you killed. Or you can obey God, and you can run away from the situation, and she'll have you killed. Which one are you going to choose? And here's Joseph's response. Genesis 39, verse 8. He says, with me in charge, he told Potiphar's wife, my master doesn't concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except for you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? Oh, Joseph, you mean that God who's been so good to you lately? Right? You're going to be faithful to that God? You mean the God who allowed you to be ripped away from your family and thrown into a pit and sold into a slavery and put in a no-win situation? That's the God that you're going to be faithful? You're going to bring God up in this situation? I mean, Joseph, how are you going to be faithful to a God who has seemingly not been faithful to you? How do we be faithful to a God who seemingly has not been faithful to us? But here's the deal. Joseph did anything that somebody in Joseph's situation would do if they were absolutely confident that God was with them and that God was telling a story here. And even though Joseph couldn't see the end of the story, Joseph trusted that God was telling a story. So Joseph did anything that anybody in his situation would do if they were confident that God was with them and that God was telling a story here. And so Joseph runs away from Potiphar's wife. And you know how Joseph is rewarded for his faithfulness? He's framed for rape. And he's thrown in the dungeon. Now here's innocent Joseph in the dungeon. Genesis 39:20. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. Here, let me just be honest. I don't want the Lord to be with me in prison. You want to know why? Because I don't want to be in prison. Lord, be with me in Tahiti. Be with me on vacation. Be with me at Disney World. Be with me in the good places. Don't be with me in prison because I don't want to be in prison. I want to avoid that prayer altogether, right? I don't even want to be in the situation to have to thank you that you're with me in prison. If you're really going to bless me, I don't want to be in prison. That's my prayer. But the Lord was with him in prison. Just carry on the verse. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him, and he showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. Just go with me. Just keep going. If the upside of the story is that you're really good friends with the prison warden, it's not a very good story, Joseph. Not looking too hot. If the conversation goes like, hey, Joseph, how you doing, man? Oh, it's wonderful. Me and the prison warden, like 2 peas in a pod, brother. I mean, we are best friends. It's not a good story, Joseph. What's happening? But somehow behind the scenes, God was still moving Joseph forward. Verse 32, the head jailer put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners. He ended up managing the whole operation. Now he has to work too. Like, he's the dungeon master. This is Joseph's story. And whether it be a few weeks or a few years later, the Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker end up in the dungeon with Joseph. And they both have dreams, one of which is better than the other, but Joseph interprets their dreams, and the cupbearer ends up getting back out. And Joseph did exactly what we would do, right, in that situation, because Joseph is innocent. And Joseph grabs the cupbearer. He says, hey, listen, I know that you have access to Pharaoh. I know you have access to the most powerful man in the whole world. He's the only one who can do something about my situation. Listen, when you get out of here, remember me. Remember me, bring me up. I'm innocent. I'm the only innocent one in the whole prison. Listen, I'm innocent. Tell Pharaoh about me. But the cupbearer forgets for 2 more years. And at this point of the story, Joseph has now been in prison as an innocent man for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, 11 years, 12 years, 13 years of his life. Sitting in the dungeon. 13 years. God, are you still here? And then Pharaoh has a dream. And nobody can interpret it. And then the cupbearer remembers. He remembers Joseph. He says, hey, there's somebody in the dungeon who can do something about this. And Joseph woke up one morning one way, and now all of a sudden, just a few hours later, he's being bathed and he's being shaved and he's being presentable so he can come to Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh says, hey, Joseph, are you able to interpret my dream? Here's the moment, Joseph. Here's the moment. Don't mess this one up. Say everything right. Speak just the right way. Bow down low. Do everything just right, Joseph. This is your moment. This can be your big break. Don't say anything dumb. And he says, Joseph, can you interpret my dream? And here it is in Genesis 41:16. Joseph says, I can't do it. What? But God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Joseph, don't bring God up in this. Pharaoh thinks that he is God. Pharaoh thinks that he's God incarnate. Here's what Joseph is saying. Hey, guy who thinks that he's God, 1, you're not God. 2, you're pretty stupid because you can't figure this out. But me and my God, hey, we got this. I'm your man because I've been in your dungeon for 13 years. Me and the dungeon God are going to fix your problem. I got this together. Hey, trust me in this. And here's the question. Joseph, how in the world are you bringing God back into this situation? You've been in the dungeon for 13 years and you're bringing God back up into this? Don't you think God's a million miles away? Joseph, you were like the French fry that got dropped in between the seat cushions, dude. God forgot about you a long time ago. And now here you are. How in the world is somebody in Joseph's situation able to bring God back in the situation and say, oh, I can't do this for you, but God can? Because Joseph did what anybody in Joseph's situation would do. They were absolutely confident that God was with them and that God was telling a story. And even though Joseph couldn't see how it was all going to pan out, Joseph still trusted that God is at work here. And Joseph chose righteousness. Joseph chose the Lord. And so Joseph interprets the dream. And here it is, Genesis 41:41. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt, because I've known you for 30 minutes. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and he put it on Joseph's finger, and he dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck, and he had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and men shouted out before him, "Make way, make way." Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. And then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, but without your word no one will lift hand or foot in all of Egypt." And now Joseph is second in command over the most powerful nation on the earth. He woke up one way. He went to sleep another way. And we've been in the series, all right, called Forward. And we've been spending a whole lot of time talking about what we're going through. We've been talking about crisis and failure and pain and test and heartbreak. I mean, lots of really uplifting things. And we've been talking a whole lot of things, a lot about what we're going through. But here's what I want to do as we end this series here with our last few minutes. I don't want to just talk about what we're going through. I want to talk about what we're going to. Because I believe that God is not just a going through God. I believe that God is a going to God. And God isn't just taking us through something. He's taking us to something. And here's the deal. You may feel like you're in the valley of the shadow of death today, but here's the reality. The reason it's a valley is because there's a peak on the other side. And you may be going through it, but I believe that God is taking us to something good if we'll trust Him in the process. I believe that He's moving us forward. I believe that. I believe that with everything on the inside of me. And you may be saying, I'm having a bad day. You may be saying, I'm having a bad decade. You may be saying, God, are the dots ever going to connect? Is it ever going to make sense? Is this as good as it gets? Is this the glass ceiling of my life? You may be asking yourself the question, remind me of why I wake up every single morning. And here's the answer. Because God is not done with you yet. And God is not finished with us, and God is telling a good story that still has a good ending, I believe. I believe that. I believe that God has a good ending for us. And what it comes down to, what Joseph's story comes down to, what our story comes down to today is this one really gigantic, huge, life-changing word, the word purpose. 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 Purpose is simply this. Purpose is knowing why you were given life. Purpose is knowing why you were given life. Why are you alive? Do you have the answer for that? If you do, write it down because you're one of the few. Do you know your purpose? Do you know why you were given life? I'm not talking about a job. I'm talking about why are you breathing, man? I'm talking about why are you putting one foot in front of the other? Why were you created? Why did God put you together in your mother's womb? Why are you here today? Why are you alive? That's what your purpose is. What? Do you have an answer for that? And because the forward momentum of our life is determined by whether or not we know our purpose. I believe that. Whether or not you're moving forward in life or not comes down to whether or not you have purpose. And I believe this. I believe that we have a general purpose, and I also believe that we have a specific purpose. Okay, and here's how I'd say that. The general purpose, here's how I would get the general purpose, is from this thing called the Westminster Catechism. I'm sure that's something you reference often. It's a confession of faith made 400 years ago. It says this, man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. I love that. I'm going to read it again because I don't think you get it. Man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. That's for every single one of us. It's to glorify God and then understand that in His presence is fullness of joy. His right hand are pleasures forevermore. Better is one day in His courts than 1,000 days elsewhere. It's to take pleasure in God and to glorify Him with everything that we do. That's our general purpose. That's for every single one of you. That's for your kids. That's for your families. That's for your neighbors. That's for every single one of us, is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. That's our general purpose, but I also believe there's a specific purpose. In other words, how do I do that? How do I do that? Man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever, but how do I do that? Because God created us all uniquely, right? How do I do that? What's my specific purpose? Here's Ephesians 1:11. Here's where we begin to discover this. It says this, it's in Christ that we find out who we are and what we're living for. Long before we ever first heard of Christ and got our hopes up, He had His eye on us. I love that. He had designs on us for glorious living. Part of the overall purpose He's working out in everything and everyone. I believe that God has designs on you for glorious living. And it may seem like a million miles away right now. It may not even seem possible. It may seem like, oh yeah, whatever. He has designs on you for glorious living. Because here's what happens when we don't have purpose. We just kind of live a passionless life. Guys, when we don't have purpose, sin is no big deal. When we don't have purpose, we just waste our time. When we don't have purpose, man, you'll work out 24 hours a day. I don't care. That's the best thing I have to live for. You'll just sleep with this person, go over there, do that thing. You'll take that job. You'll follow the money. You'll move over here. Whatever it is, you'll follow the thing that glimmers the most in the moment when you don't have purpose, because purpose is that carrot that's hanging out in front of you, keeping you putting one foot in front of the other. But when you do have purpose, like Ephesians 1 says, when you know who you are and what you're living for, everything in your life changes. Man, now I know who I am and what I'm supposed to be living for. Now I regard money differently, possessions differently. I regard friendships differently. I pray differently. I relate to God differently because now I know what I'm supposed to do. If I have purpose, listen, I will turn down a $10 million a year job for purpose. For purpose. Let me tell you, I'll make $5 an hour for purpose. For purpose. Because there's a huge difference between success and significance, and I want to live significantly. I don't want to just be successful in the world's eyes. I want to live purposeful. Yes. I want to know that as I'm walking, man, I'm right in the middle of God's will for my life. Yes. I want to cross the finish line and see him face to face and hear, well done, good and faithful. Oh, that's the delight of my life. There's nothing better than being right in the middle of God's purpose. And I'm here to tell you today, you might be 10, you might be 100, but it's not too late to be stepping into God's purpose for our lives. And very few do it. Very few ever do it. But I believe that today, for all of us, God wants to begin moving us forward towards our purpose. So let's dive into this. How do we begin doing that? Here's the first idea. First thing to begin moving forward towards purpose, I have to believe that I actually do have a purpose. I have to believe that I have a purpose. Here's the idea. Here's the idea in the room. Here's how most of us are wired, okay? We actually believe that everybody else has a purpose except for us. You're not the only one who thinks that, by the way. We all think that. I know, we're all nice little church people. Oh no, bless the Lord, brother. I'm seated with Christ in heavenly places. No, man, I'm good. Every single one of us looks at everybody else and be like, oh man, look at their gifting. Oh, look at that. Oh, she's so good at that. Oh man, he's so good at that. Oh man, look at all they have. And oh, I don't have anything. Oh, poor me. That's what we all do. We all think everybody else has this huge purpose and we don't have anything. And if we actually do think maybe I do have a purpose, I think that it's this big compared to everybody else's. Everybody else has this giant Mount Everest purpose and I have this little inch of purpose. And here's the deal. When it came to Joseph knew that he had purpose. That's how he's able to put one foot in front of the other. That's how he didn't give up. He said, God, I don't understand it, but I believe that one, I have a purpose, and I believe that there's purpose even to what I'm in. I don't believe that I'm a mistake, and I believe that what I'm in isn't a mistake either. And even though I can't see the end of it, and it's really even muddy while I'm standing in it, I'm just going to believe that I have purpose. Are you with me today? You might not know what it is, but here's the first decision you have to make is just to simply say, I believe that I have purpose. I believe this. I believe that God doesn't create anything without purpose. God is a purposeful God. God creates everything with purpose, except for cats. Cats have no purpose. Cats are from the devil. Everything else, God created with purpose, including you. And here's the deal. We have an enemy, right? We have an enemy. Come back. We have an enemy who comes only to steal and kill and destroy. And one of the things that he loves doing more than anything else is destroying purpose, killing purpose, removing purpose. Because here's the deal, guys, here, really honest. If the enemy can get you to believe that you don't have purpose, you'll take care of the rest yourself. Right? Is if you think, I don't have purpose, I'm just meandering, God's forgotten about me, I'm not really going anywhere, you'll sin, it won't be a problem. You'll go that way. You'll take that job. You'll go do that thing. You'll go marry that person. You'll do whatever you want to do because there's no purpose anyways. And the enemy has your purpose in his crosshairs. But I'm here today, again, to tell you, everything God creates, he creates with purpose. You may have been told you were a mistake your whole life. I'm here today to tell you, you have purpose. You have purpose. You have purpose. Don't give up hope. You might be in the middle of the depths. Don't give up hope because God created you with purpose. Even when the Lord formed you in your mother's womb, he saw all your days. He saw the end from the beginning. And he still created you anyways because he created you with purpose. Here's the second idea. I believe that I have to have purpose, and I also believe this to move forward into my purpose. We have to stop trying to survive, and we have to start learning to live. Stop surviving and start thriving. See, with this idea, with going through and to, most of us spend our lives focused on what we're going through. And we never actually begin to start moving to. And we get so heads down, we get so problem focused. And I know, I understand it. We live in society. Lots of us are wired to kind of protect. We're just like, hey, don't rock the boat, maintain the status quo. Hey, don't really reach out there. Don't really say that. Don't risk this, because what if you lost it all? What if you lost it all? And because of that, we never actually move forward into our purpose, because we're always retreating. We're always protecting. We're always maintaining when we're called to actually live. Because Jesus said he's going to give us life and life to the fullest. Are we actually living that? And I would say most of us are not. And a lot of it comes back to we're not willing to risk. We're not willing to live in faith. We're so busy protecting and maintaining and just trying to survive. But God actually wants us to live. When you see Joseph did not curl up on a ball, go into the fetal position and suck his thumb in the dungeon, right? You don't see Joseph, he's like, my life is so bad. Right? Joseph lived. Joseph said, I don't see it all. I don't even understand how God's going to get me from A to B. I don't even know. But here's what I've understood about purpose. The direction from point A to point B is very seldom a straight line. And even when Joseph was in the middle of it, Joseph refused to just go back to survival, just maintaining, just trying to put a little food in the belly, just trying to keep a roof over the head. Man, I want to live. I want to live. So Joseph kept putting himself out there. You don't see Joseph, right? When the cupbearer and the baker come in, when he's called before Pharaoh, he's not like, hey, Pharaoh, I got my own problems, right? Does anybody ever tell you their problems? And you're like, oh man, I got you beat. My problems are so much worse than your problems. If you only knew, Pharaoh, you just got a dream. I've been in the dungeon for 13 years. You want to talk about problems? And Joseph doesn't have the attitude of, listen, when God gets me out of my problems, I'll help you out with yours. He says, no, I'm just going to live. I'm not here to survive. I'm not here to maintain. I'm not here to protect. I'm here to live. And God's called me to a life of risk. God's called me to a life of putting one foot in front of the other and moving forward. And one of my biggest pet peeves, and I know we all, including myself, we all resort back to this, but way too many Christians are playing it safe. Way too many Christians are protecting. Way too many Christians are afraid to rock the boat when that's the life that we're called to live, right? You read the book of Acts and you're like, well, that was good for them, I guess. No, that's bought out of risk. That's bought, when you're like, I'm pretty sure Peter didn't have a mortgage. And guys, let me tell you, one of the biggest enemies to a life of purpose is the fact that we live in the suburbs. So that means that we have a lot to lose, a lot of us, right? Oh man, I got the house and I got the RV and someone's got the boat and we got the cars over here. Man, what would happen? Oh man, if I actually started typing and started writing that book, what if I actually quit my job to step into my purpose? I don't know if I could afford all that. And what happens is we shrink back and we just start surviving instead of thriving. You know, Jesus never played it safe, right? If there's many things Jesus could be accused of, one of them is definitely not that he was the guy who played it safe. And right before the cross, leading up to the cross, he gets in a conversation with Peter. And here in Matthew 16, verse 21, here's where we pick up. It says, from that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and he would actually be killed and be raised the third day. He tells his disciples this. And then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, far be it from you, Lord, this will not happen to you. But Jesus turned to Peter and he said, get behind me, Satan. You're an offense to me, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men. In other words, you're trying to just get me to survive. I didn't come here just to survive. I came here to live. And then Jesus said to his disciples, in fact, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself. Let him take up his cross. Let him follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And guys, life is not found in survival, but in diving into God's purpose for our lives. And what Jesus is saying here is that anytime we're in survival mode, anytime we're going inward, anytime we're protecting, anytime we're in fear, we're moving further away from God's purpose for our life. But anytime we're giving, anytime we're generous, anytime we open up our arms, anytime we're giving our life away, we're moving forward towards God's purpose for our life. And I understand that we live in a fearful world. I understand that everything can change tomorrow. I understand the economy could collapse in an hour. I understand that it's like you turn on the news and you're like, am I in the twilight zone? Right? You're like, what's going on with this election? Like, what in the world is happening to this nation? I understand that, and so it produces a lot of fear inside of us, so we just want to retreat. But we're never made to survive. We were made to live. And let me just say this. Can we just agree on this? November will not fix our nation. Jesus fixes our nation. I don't care how the elections go. Let me just tell you this. Can I just tell you this really quickly? As a pastor, let me pastor you for a second. Can you please stay off Facebook for an hour about Donald Trump and about Hillary Clinton? Please, Lord, help us. Guys, let me tell you, one person will not break our nation. What breaks our nation is when the people of God stop living with purpose. That's what breaks our nation. You want to know how our nation is even here? Because Christians, us included, and those who came before us, just started surviving, just started living like everybody else. When we were called to risk, we were called to step out in faith. We were called to pray for the sick. We were called to cast out demons. We were called to preach the gospel. We were called to see blind eyes healed. We were called to see the leper healed. We were called to love the loveless. We were called to accept people and comfort people and heal people in the name of Jesus. But we started playing it safe and paying our mortgages and just being content to close the garage door and go home on Sunday afternoons and just watch some TV and entertain it away because we don't have purpose. That's how our nation gets to the place where it is right now. Elections aren't going to fix anything. The church, and what God is doing through it is the hope of the world. The government is not our hope. And let me even just say this, guys. When God starts revealing that purpose to you, I remember this. We were in the first, I think, honestly, like month of marriage, okay? And I remember Summer said to me, she said, hey, I feel like God just reminded me when I was little, God said at one point in my life, I'll be in full-time ministry. And I said, well, that's great for you. Because I want nothing to do with that. That sounds terrible. I don't want to do that. Like, I definitely don't want to be a preacher. Because all preachers do is bore people. Like, I want anything to do with that. I don't want to do that. And what even happened is God began revealing it. I still remember this. I felt that nudging. I felt that thing that's saying, well, I don't know anything else, but I do feel like God is saying you're going to go in that direction. I was still afraid to put a flag in the ground and claim what God has said. Because here's the deal. If I acknowledge what God has said, then what if it doesn't happen? What will I look like an idiot? What about the fear of what other people will say and rejection and job and pay and all these sorts of things? And what it comes back to is we're just trying to survive. What has God put in your heart? What dream did he put in your heart when you were little? What is God birthing in you now? Claim that thing. Move forward in that thing. Don't just survive. Man, live. Live. Life and life to the fullest. That's how we're going to begin moving forward towards our purpose. What's another idea? Here's the third idea. To move forward towards our purpose, I want to discover my gift and my direction. I believe that there's a degree that we can look at something and to a degree tell what its purpose is, all right? If you see a bird and it has wings, it's probably gonna fly, right? 9 times out of 10, I'd say it's probably gonna fly. You see a cheetah, right? Tall, lean, long legs, spots, sharp teeth. What's it gonna do? It's probably some sort of camouflage carnivore predator, right? You see a plunger. You probably know what it's going to be used for, right? In the same way, I believe, I kind of have a unique perspective. Obviously, I'm the one who's looking at all of you right now. But I think many of us, we can do this, that just by looking, just by observing for a few minutes, I can begin to tell a degree of your purpose. Because I believe that God gifted us and God uniquely made us. This goes to 1 Corinthians 12, the different parts of the body, right? That we're not all elbows, but we do need an elbow, right? We're not all little toes, but we do need a little toe, right? Because lots of you are like, I don't need a little toe. Well, an exercise scientist would say that you'd fall over because that's balance. You're like, I don't need a little toe, you know? You do. You do need a little, we're all different parts of the body, right? I was watching the band during worship, right? We're not all electric guitar players. What if the whole band was electric guitar players? That's how we worship. Well, we do need an electric guitar player, though, right? God didn't make us all the same way, and that's a blessing. God made us uniquely. And here's the reason. God didn't give you gifts for no reason. God gave you gifts to use to move towards your purpose. And I believe that we may not know it on the front end, but I believe that God's taking us closer to our purpose through our gifts. And I'd even ask this, what's your primary gift? What's your secondary gift? What are you good at? And don't be like, well, I'm not that good at it. I mean, I'm just kind of good. No, don't be modest. What did God put in you? What did God gift you in? Are you a servant? Man, do you love kids? Are you humorous? Do you love speaking? Are you good in business? Whatever that is. I mean, what giftings did God put on the inside of you? Because I guarantee you this, we talk about this in the office a lot, is that the things that some of these other guys love, I would hate doing that. But the things that I do, some of them would hate doing this. And then here's the deal. We don't exalt gifts over one another. God uniquely made us. And so here's how I'd say it. Your gifting gives direction. Your gifting gives direction. So here's what I want to do. I want to take the giftings that God put in me, and I want to start walking in that direction. And so maybe I'll take a job in that area. Maybe I'll serve in the church in that area. I think a lot of us miss out on our purpose because we don't even try some of those things out in the church, the giftings that God put inside of us. And I'd even say it like this, that it's hard to steer a parked car, is the advice I give every person when it comes to purpose. It's hard to steer a parked car. In other words, you can be sitting there and trying to yank that wheel, but you're like, I'm not moving anywhere. Yeah, because you're not moving forward. And so here's the deal with giftings. I want to start understanding what's some of the wiring that God put inside me, and I want to start heading in that direction. Here's what I've understood, is that I start heading in that direction, God can steer me. God can direct me. But a lot of us have this mentality of, well, I'm just waiting on God. You're not waiting on God. God's waiting on you. I think God is waiting on us way more than we're waiting on God. And God's like, hey, put one foot in front of the other. I put giftings and talents and abilities, and you start moving in that direction, and let me guide you as you go. 2001 was the first time Summer and I ever served in the church in Victory. And we got involved in the children's ministry. And the 2-year-old group. I didn't have kids at that time. I'm a different person now. But dear God, terrible twos. Terrible twos. I remember at that time, I'm like, you go into the room, and it's like walking into a dark rainforest at night. Like all the animals are up on the walls, all the kids. There's like 50 little 2-year-olds in the room staring at you, foaming at the mouth. I'm like, they're going to eat me. This is horrible. And I remember I would look around the room, and some of these other people serving in the room are like, stop killing him. It's good. Bless you. Lord loves you. Teach you about Jesus. And I'm like, that's terrible. This is terrible. And I remember I would leave the room, and I would feel more tired after that time than preaching for 6 hours, which some of you are like, I feel like you do that. Because I began to find out what I love and what I don't love. Jesus, the disciples find him, and it's lunchtime. They say, here's some food. He says, no. Doing the will of God is my food. What's your food? What's your food? What gets you excited? What fills you up? What do you feel like you're on top of the world when you do it? Some of you, it may not even look like, some of us would say, well, that's not spiritual. Let me tell you, if you do it as unto the Lord, it is spiritual. Some of you close a business deal and you're like, that's the best thing ever. I don't want to do that. I'm up here, I'm preaching. I'm like, this is the best thing ever. Some of you are like, I don't want to do that. I want to take care of my kids. They're like, this is the best thing ever because God gifted us uniquely. Start moving in that direction and see what the Lord's going to do with it. It may start small, but I guarantee you, God will refine that as you go. Because here he steered me away from children's ministry, if you notice. And what happens is I joined a small group, and then I led a small group conversation. And I was like, well, that was interesting. I wonder, maybe I'll try and do that again. When we find Joseph is so unique. It's so interesting. I'd never seen this before I read it again just this last time. I read Joseph's story 1,000 times. What we began seeing is that Joseph had a gift. You know what Joseph's gift was? Administration. Joseph was really good at doing, but he was even better at strategically taking a step back, evaluating the situation and say, well, no, there's a better way to do it than that. In fact, let's stop this over here. Let's start that over there. Let's put these two together. No, let's build this. Let's decrease that right there. And he was able to objectively take a step back and administrate a situation. You know where it began? on a hillside with his brothers tending sheep. And he was trying to tell them how to do it better, and they wouldn't listen because he's the little brother, so he had to go home and he had to tell his dad. He's like, hey, Dad, there's a better way to do that. And then he finds himself in Potiphar's house, and he starts administrating Potiphar's house. And then he finds himself in the dungeon. He starts administrating the dungeon. I guarantee you that was the cleanest, most well-run dungeon there's ever been. And here's what I know. If the Lord had told Joseph, hey, Joseph, one day you're going to be administrating Egypt. If he had told him that when he was a little kid, Joseph would have run away from it. And that's why God doesn't tell us the specifics, because it would scare the mess out of you. If God had told me when I was 13 years old that I would be up on a stage in front of hundreds of people preaching the gospel, I would be in Antarctica right now. Like living in a little igloo, drinking my hot chocolate. Like, I don't want anything to do with that. But God was taking Joseph somewhere. And what began as a little boy with a dream, right? God began developing and refining and sharpening and growing. And to the point where Joseph was so faithful with the gifts that God had put him in and began moving in that direction and taking that opportunity when it arose, that God was able to bring him to a big stage. And God was able to use him in a way that Joseph had never even imagined. And that's how we began moving forward towards a purpose, because we began discovering the gifts that God put in us and began moving in that direction. Here's the last idea. What it takes to move forward towards purpose. Trust God with our story. Trust God with your story. Trust God with my story. Joseph had a million opportunities to give up along the way, right? Joseph could have thrown his hands up and say, hey, God's left me. Hey, I'm in the dungeon for 13 years now. I'm done with this. What in the world's going on? But Joseph trusted God. He didn't take the situation into his own hands. He didn't try and tell God how it was supposed to work. Somebody. He didn't try and tell God the specifics. He let God work out the specifics. Come on, somebody. That's where we get in trouble. Like, hey, God, here's how it's supposed to work, because here's what I'm supposed to do, and here's what you're supposed to do, God. He trusted God with his story. And let's see how Joseph's story closes out here. As Joseph interpreted the dream for Pharaoh, he interpreted that there was going to be a famine in the land, right? And because of that, the Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of the nation to prepare for the famine. And Joseph was the perfect man, because Joseph had been sharpening his skills from a hillside. Now he's over an entire nation. And what Joseph did, he stepped into the situation. He says, all right, no, we're doing this totally wrong. We need to take that ground. We need to reclaim it for harvesting. And, we need to plant over here. We got to plant here. Remember, guys, hey, guys, famine's coming. Famine's coming. He kept the nation on its toes. He says, hey, listen up. You guys aren't doing it. All right, you're fired. We're going to put new guys in there. We got to grow this. We need to build a new silo over there. We got to do this. We got to do that. And he was able to administrate the country to the point where tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people were saved through his actions. And then the famine strikes. And then his brothers come to Egypt to get grain. And they don't recognize Joseph in the moment, but Joseph recognizes them. And then Joseph has a conversation with his brothers. He springs it on them that he's Joseph, and he says this in Genesis 45:8. Notice the trust in God with the story. Notice the perspective that Joseph has now. He says, guys, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there's been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing or reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Nick, get this. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. What? You didn't send me here, guys. God did. Talk about perspective. Joseph trusted the Lord with his story to the point where one day, get this, it finally made sense. He finally got it. Let me say this. It didn't make sense in the pit. It didn't make sense when he was sold into slavery. It didn't make sense when he was framed for rape. It didn't make sense when he's thrown in the dungeon and 1 year turned to 13 years. It didn't make sense when the cupbearer forgot about him. It didn't even make sense when he was called up to stand before Pharaoh, because Pharaoh could have just thrown him back in the dungeon. It didn't make sense until he was standing square in the middle of his purpose. And he was able to look up and say, oh my Lord, I finally get it. I finally get it. That God refined that gifting inside me, and God gave me a dream when I was a little kid about my bundle of grain standing up and all my brothers bowing down before me, and that's playing out right before my very eyes. He's like, now I get it. And God had to take me through the valley, and man, that pain and that heartache and that struggle right there, God had to take me. It's just another cog in the wheel. God had to send me on this route to get me right here. To the point where my actions and my gifting is now saving not just people's lives, it saved a nation and it saved my family. To the point where Joseph understood, man, my purpose is to use my gift to save people's lives. If you don't have a purpose, that's a pretty good one to hold on to right now. I'm going to use my gifts that God gave me to save people's lives. He says, I get it now, guys. You thought you were just throwing me in a pit, but God was moving me somewhere. And even when I was sold into slavery, God was still at work. And even when I was framed for rape, God used that. Because God used it to get me in the dungeon. If I had never been in the dungeon, if I had never been in the dungeon, then I would have never met the cupbearer. If I had never met the cupbearer, wait a second, even if he had remembered me, it wouldn't have done any good, because then I wouldn't have been in place when Pharaoh had the dream. And then when I was called before Pharaoh, God was just as with me before Pharaoh as he was in the middle of the dungeon. And that's when it finally makes sense. Romans 8:28. And we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. And when Joseph is standing square in the middle of his purpose, he looks up and he says, I finally get it, guys. I finally get all the heartbreak. I finally get all the drama. I finally get all the pain. It finally makes sense now, because it brought me to this place right here. And I couldn't see it when I was in it, but I see it now. I see it now. I just trusted God with my story. I didn't disobey God. I didn't run away from God. I didn't curse God. I trusted that God was telling a story here. And I actually trusted that he was taking me somewhere. If God was in it, then he was going to take me through it. And not just through it, he was going to take me to something. And here's the deal. I believe in that place, Joseph actually said, and I wouldn't change a thing. I wouldn't change a thing. All the heartache, all the heartbreak, because it got me to where I am right now. And I believe a handful of us, even this morning, you need to believe that same thing. At the end of this, you'd be able to say, man, I wouldn't have picked it, but I wouldn't change it. And here's what I've discovered. When trouble comes, when pain comes, when heartbreak comes, we can either view it as a setback or a setup. And if we'll trust God with our story, if we'll choose to see it as a setup, we'll believe that God's taking us someplace good. We'll still keep putting one foot in front of the other to move forward. And God's going to take the good, the bad, and the ugly, and he's going to make it a beautiful story in the end. Let me even say it like this. Let me give you a glimpse into me. I can say with relative confidence that you wouldn't be here today, especially sitting in this space. You would not be here today if I had not hurt my pitching arm in high school. That was the end of the world. You wouldn't be here today if I wasn't raised in a Presbyterian home. You wouldn't be here today if I wasn't born again when I was 14. And I played baseball all through my life up into high school, and was playing and just overpitched one summer in summer league and just threw my arm out. And that was my dream, to go and do that. And let me tell you, if I had finished high school with that, I had a handful of just little scholarship offers. I would have played in a little community college up in North Carolina somewhere. That's where I was. And I guarantee you I would not be here right now. Because what happens was when I severely damaged my arm, I said, all right, I got to do something. So I got involved in drama. Began to open up my personality. And then I finished high school, and I wanted to go to UNC Chapel Hill because that's where all my friends were going. I wanted to go to college with my friends. Like, who doesn't want to do that? But I got denied to go to Chapel Hill. Got accepted at Wake Forest and at UGA. But I got denied at Chapel Hill. I applied at UGA just because, well, my whole extended family's in Athens, so well, let's just give it a try. And so came down here instead of being up there. And freshman year in college, I got baptized in the Holy Spirit. I met my wife literally on the same night. And then in 1999, we started coming to Victory. And then when I graduated college and we got married, we joined a small group. And in a small group one day, I taught a lesson. I said, I wonder if there's something to that. And small group apprentice, small group leader, small group coach. All of our friends left Fusion at that time. That's what we were in, the young adult ministry. All of our friends, literally every single one of our friends left. We said, God has not called us out. We're going to stay right here. Oh, that hurt. That really hurt. So we're going to stay right here. And in 2003, I lost my job. And even here, we know this. Even if you know that that's not like the job, it still hurts to get fired, doesn't it? Right? You're like, this job's horrible. I'm not going anywhere with this job. But then you get fired, you're like, oh, dang it. And I was making maps, by the way. I had a geography degree from UGA. I was a map maker. Some of you were like, didn't expect that. But God closed that door because I was not supposed to make maps for the rest of my life. But it hurt. God redirected. I'm standing there at the unemployment line being like, God, really? Like this is how we're doing this thing? This is how this is going to pan out? And I started taking little odd jobs. And at that time, I had preached my first sermon in a retirement home. I've been asked to do that. And it was horrible. It was really bad. But I actually kind of liked it. It was a horrible sermon. But I actually kind of enjoyed it. And I was like, well, maybe if I don't know, that's a gifting. Maybe I'll provide some direction. Maybe I'll try and do that a little bit more. So for a time, I was the English-speaking pastor of a Korean Baptist church. Don't really talk about that season very often. I did that for a while. And then in 2005, I preached a sermon in Fusion, and Pastor Dennis was there. And he called me into his office that next week and said, hey, as you know, the current Fusion pastor, he's going to plant a church. He said, we've been praying about it, and we'd like to offer you the job. And I'm like, okay. That's literally the job interview. That's how that went. And then 5 years later, we start having the conversation as Victory. Hey, should we plant in the city or should we plant in the suburbs? I raise my hand and say, hey, I'm a suburbs guy. I'd love to go to the suburbs and start Victory Hamilton Mill. And here we are. Here we are. But we would not be here if I hadn't hurt my arm in high school. And here's what I've discovered. The ups and the downs of life, the good, the bad, and the ugly. God has a way. Listen. Some of you got to grab a big bear hug of the statement. God has a way of taking all of our disappointments and turning them into our destiny. And we need to believe that today. We believe that today. And here's what it comes down to. There's the last scripture, and then we're going to close. Here's what we're going to have to believe. Here's what we're going to have to grab a hold of. And this is Paul's charge to us. Here's what we've been on for the last few weeks. Philippians 3, verse 12. Here's what we're going to have to believe. Not that I've already obtained all this. I haven't reached the end of the goal, guys. I believe I'm walking in the purpose, but I'm not all the way there yet. But I press on to make it my own because Christ Jesus has made me his own. Brothers, I don't consider that I made it my own yet, but here's one thing I do. I got to forget what lies behind. I can't linger on that. I can't stay there. I can't feel sorry for myself. I can't mope. I can't survive. I can't just protect. He said, I got to strain forward to what lies ahead. And I press on towards the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. Because I believe that God's at work in my story, and I'm going to trust him with my story. I'm not going to fall back into survival mode. I'm not going to just fall back into protecting. I'm going to trust. I'm going to step out in faith. I'm going to follow the Lord. I'm going to open up the laptop, and I'm going to start writing the book. I believe that God's taking me that direction. I'm going to follow in that direction. I had a couple come to me a few weeks ago when we started this series and say, this is confirmation, we're moving to Africa. Man, that's risking. That's risking. I'm not telling you to move to Africa. God called them to move to Africa. What's God calling you to do? To move you further into your purpose. And God, whatever you gifted me in, I'm going to start moving in that direction. And I believe that on that road, I'm going to trust you with my story. It may look up one day and down the next, but I'm going to trust that you're taking me somewhere. And so I'm not going to stop moving. I'm not just going to sit down and say, well, this is as good as it gets. No, I'm going to keep moving forward because I believe that God has a purpose and God is telling a good story. Amen. Amen.